Right. So welcome everybody. Happy to see you guys here. So I was saying a bunch of new and old faces as well during the last few minutes. So this session is all about freelancing skills or skills that you'll need to have as a freelancer to basically level up. We have our guest here, Kerry, that's gonna run us through those tips. So a little bit about what we're going to be talking today. So the agenda for today, I'm going to give you a brief intro to Flux to whoever's new and is not very familiar with what and how we do it. And then I'm going to pass the mic to Kerry to talk about effective freelancing. So what you need to know about creating your own value proposition and how you communicate that to your customer for the initial stages of the projects. And then throughout the project, how do you manage? So how do you do project management in the context of sort of freelance work? And how does Flux fit in? So what do we provide as a tool to help in that regard? We're then going to have a Q&A session around 20 minutes ish. And then after that, the official presentation will end. But we usually hang out an extra half an hour, sometimes a little bit more even, to hear comments, feedbacks. If any of you is blocked in something, we're going to have time to answer all these type of questions. So getting on to the intro of Flux. So Flux is basically a browser-based EDA or design tool. We started developing Flux roughly 2 years ago, and we went from just schematics to having schematics plus simulator, and now we also have a full-blown PCB editor. And so what that enables, so the fact that Flux is a browser-based tool instead of a desktop tool enables us to basically create a complete end-to-end solution in one tool. So there's no need to jump from different tools to create schematics and then simulate and then PCB editor. So if you want to go forward, yeah. So it's an integrated workflow. So everything is in the same tool in the browser. So part sourcing. So being in a browser, you can get live information about parts, availability, pricing, etc. And then again, schematic simulation and PCB layout is in a single tool, and it always stays in sync. So there's no problem of things getting out of sync. Modern collaboration, which is particularly important for the topic about today's session. So it allows multiple people, not necessarily multiple designers, like hardware designers at the same time, but multiple people from different disciplines to interact in the same tool, right? Mechanical engineers, firmware engineers, manufacturers, they can all collaborate within the same tool. And that also allows us like real-time version control, design reviews, commenting, and so on and so forth. And then one of the big paradigms of Flux is reusability, or what we call reusable blocks, which is basically as you will have on GitHub or other sort of more software-related tools, you can leverage other people's work and build on top of it. So we're not reinventing the wheel every time we need to create a new design. So you can create parts and modules that you or potentially other people, if you decide to share, can reuse for their projects. And there's a few things that are sort of slightly different, or in some cases radically different in Flux. So for example, the way we define parts, so a part can be just a single part, like a single component or footprint, or it can be a collection of parts, like a module, right? In Flux treats them the exact same way. So you can have infinite nesting of this module. So you can have a module that when you double click, it's another module that when you double click, it's just part, for example. So we also have a different approach to design rules or PCB design rules. They work a lot more like they work in software where they cascade, they have different properties, and they work basically real time, and they can affect the design. And the third thing is that simulation is always on. There's no need. So first, there's no need to change tools, but also there's no need to turn it on and off. The simulator is always running. So that's a game-changing experience for people using simulators. So just a shameless plug, we've done crash courses and sessions and deep dives in all these three aspects of Flux. So I've shared our YouTube channel link with videos about each one of these. You have deep dives about the rules, about sub-modules, about the simulator, and then crash courses on how to use them. So feel free to head out to our YouTube channel and watch our past sessions. So with that, I'm going to leave it to Kerry to tell us a bit more about freelancing, his experience doing contractor work, and what we can learn in terms of soft skills to improve our contractor game.
Hey everyone, I'm Kerry. Quick background on who I am and what I've done. I worked on iPhone hardware team at Apple. I did essentially iPhones 5S through 12. I was one of the first people on iPhone 10 and one of the last people off of it after ramp. After Apple, I wanted a smaller team environment, so I went to a startup making intelligence equipment for the Department of Defense. Now I run an ex-Apple consulting group, and we're active in 4 separate industries. This is my proof right here. I don't know if you can see me. This is a iPhone 10 main logic board.
Ooh.
So one of the things that's interesting about this is it's a stacked PCB concept. So you can see out my window is what you can see. You can see there's 3 separate parts of this board. There's a top, a bottom, and an interposer. This is one of the most tightly integrated boards I've ever worked on. And you can see, here's the actual proof, is these are the signatures of the folks that worked on it with me.
That's so cool. If you stop sharing screen, it'll actually show your screen bigger. If you want.
Here, let me do that real quick.
Do that.
If you guys can see that.
Very nice.
Yep. Feel free to ask me questions about that process later on in the Q&A.
Cool.
All right, so I'm going to share a couple lessons that I learned along the way for being an effective freelancer. Hopefully there's some good info here. If there's not, hit me with some questions and I'll try and be more helpful later. At a high level, we're going to talk about a framework for how to build out a business side of freelancing. People always think that EE contracting is all about EE work, and you have to be good at EE work, but it's more like 30-70 EE skills versus managing customer expectations. So we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff. We're going to talk about value proposition, communication, project management, and then there's some tools in Flux that make it a little bit easier to do some of these things. Starting with value prop, for anyone who doesn't know, value prop is what you can do for the customer that other people can't or can't do as well. It's the value that you're proposing. You want to communicate to the customer that you're worth it. It's scary to contract out a design to somebody. You don't know what you're going to get, so you want to make sure that you put them at ease. So how do you do that? You have to figure out exactly what makes you valuable, and then you want to communicate that to the customer. So I started working for a bunch of big companies and then realized that my niche is actually startups. So I like going from idea to product and then scaling the crap out of it from idea to like 1 million units. So I made a list of all the companies in that niche. Sorry, thanks. So I made a list of companies in that niche and then prioritized the ones where I had connections. But what if you don't have connections or even experience? You can't hide it. You have to be upfront and honest about it. And you can go and identify ground level opportunities in the space that you want to get into. You can offer incentives, like maybe do a couple designs for free, and then use that to build your credibility. Maybe you want to do a hobby project in that space and build your portfolio. then you can show off that you're doing these projects already. And that's how you have that credibility in that space. It's hard to break into a new product space, but that's how you differentiate yourself and you grow your business. Once you're a specialist, that's where the higher rates come in. One of the traps that people get into is becoming a generalist. It's important to specialize, but surround yourself with other people to fill those gaps. Yes, the customer wants to just give you an idea and get a full product back, but it's better to do that as a team rather than an individual. And then Flux has a community that can help with some of that stuff. Once you have your value prop, how do you communicate it? You can't write a huge paragraph and expect them to get back to you. No one's going to read it. Your first sentence has to communicate your value. Instead of saying something like, hi, I'm really interested in this opportunity. I like making widgets. You can say something specific like, I've made 30 boards in this space and they all work first try. That communicates your value much more specifically to the customer. The framing is super important. You want to communicate that you can do the job and back it up with proof, but you also want to show that you understand their problems and that you're the one to solve them. And they're not just going to give you the problems. You have to figure it out and give them solutions. If you don't have solutions, you can briefly talk about projects that you've done that are similar. I sent a pitch to Whoop a while back. They just announced a new product and I was like, hey, I bet you're having problems ramping because of COVID. I ramped iPhone 10 and they never got back to me, but I tried. So that's how to find and communicate your value. Once you have the customer, this is how you keep them and build trust. These are some rules that serve me really well at Apple, also in consulting. And even when I was trying to get a mortgage, the first one is be surprisingly responsive. It doesn't mean stay up all night and answer questions. But during the time that you are working and the customer knows that you're working, you want to respond quickly. If you're responding super quickly, you don't always have every answer right at that moment. It's fine, but you can't guess at what the solution is going to be. You say, I don't know, but here's what I'm going to go do to figure it out. And that's sort of what the next one is. When someone comes to you with a problem, you don't just say, okay, you're trying to help them. So let them know how you're going to do that. If a customer says their board is delayed by 3 weeks because of a part shortage, you say, I'm sorry that happened. You want me to call them or you want me to go find a part for you? You want to give them options so they're in control, but you always want to offer your help and you want to be specific about it. The last one is a huge one that I learned at Apple. You want to end your conversations or meetings or whatever by going over your actions. This is super effective. Like if you say, it was great talking to you, I'm going to go run this by Nico, add the components to the board, and then give the factory a heads up this is happening. It shows you're paying attention and you have a plan and you're going to get shit done. So that was effective communication that proves that you are going to do a good job this time. Project management skills prove you'll do a good job every time. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. The general rule is to define checkpoints and expectations with the customer so they know when you'll review with them and what they'll get. I like to do 3 steps. You can do however many you want. Block diagram, schematic, and layout. Knowing where the design is at within these stages is also helpful when you're estimating your time, like when you're quoting projects. If the block diagram doesn't exist yet, or if the job is layout only, it changes your time estimate. And what if your customer isn't technical? You should still have reviews with them. You want to go over the major problems you had along the way and what you did to solve them. Let them know if you did anything different from the expectations that you guys talked about earlier. If nothing else, you're just trying to communicate to them that you're working hard and you want to set the expectation that you're going to continue to do that next time. So you can freelance in any EE software you want, but I've been working with a couple of customers in Flux, and there's some stuff that Flux does that makes it a little bit easier to work with customers. One of them is communication. In other tools, you have to like export the design and then send that over to them, and maybe they download their tool and then they take a look at it and they have trouble opening it, and then you have to go back and forth over email. In Flux, you just send them a link and you can control whether they comment or if they also have edit privileges, but it just stays up to date for them. And this stops me from sending a bunch of emails to them all the time, and they can just see whenever they want. I found that this makes it a lot easier for me to get people to review my board because I'm just sending them a link instead of having them download an entire program. This one's kind of similar, but more for when you're pitching customers. How do you convince someone you're for real? You have to show them your designs, but you can't do that in other tools. So you take a screenshot of your design and you send that over, but that's not quite as effective. In Flux, you just send a link to your profile and they can see all your projects. They can even open them if they want to. If you've ever interviewed an EE, you know how big that is. It's a good way to build trust with the customer before you do any work for them. So yeah, that's some of the things that I found in Flux that are kind of helpful and some tips for being a freelance engineer. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to hand it back to Nico.
Yeah, so the last that we wanted to talk about, another shameless plug, is the community of people that we're building at Flux. We have a Slack channel that I'm going to paste a link to in a minute. But basically, there's a community of like-minded people already there with many contractors that help each other. So contracting or freelancing is many times kind of a solo or lonely work, but there's people there that help each other. Sometimes they get reviews done, advice in search for parts or manufacturers or whatever. So that will be a good opportunity for anybody that's currently freelancing to join us. I mean, of course, there's other people that are not necessarily freelancing that are using Flux for their own projects. So of course, you're welcome to join as well. But there's a big community of freelancers doing work in Flux and helping each other. And then we also want to hear from you guys if anybody is a freelancer or contractor or consultant here in the chat. We're thinking about doing a weekly bootcamp for contractors or freelancers where we touch on specific skills, soft skills and hard skills that are required for like good contracting work. So if you guys are interested, we'd also like to hear from you. What things would you like to listen, to talk about? Like what formats would you be interested in? So we're putting this together and it's going to start most likely next week. So any feedback on that is also welcome. So with that, we can get to the Q&A session. There's already a bunch of questions in the chat. Kerry, do you want me to read them out and you'll answer? Or
yeah, why don't you pick whichever one you want to start with, and then everyone can hear it, and then I'll jump in.
All right. So yeah, there's a good one here from Lance, which says, what sorts of questions do you typically ask clients when you're in discovery mode? So to figure out if the project is good for you, what the stage is.
Yeah, I don't start with a ton of questions when I'm in the discovery phase for companies, because I do a lot of research on the back end. So typically what I do is I do a lot of either research on like AngelList, or since I decided that my niche is startups, or go through LinkedIn, go through connections, see companies that are sort of in my orbit, and then figure out exactly what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And then I can decide whether I'm going to pitch them or not. That sort of limits my the number of companies that I pitch, which is sometimes a bad thing because not everyone answers you all the time. And so that's kind of a bummer. But yeah, once I'm starting to engage with a customer and they have some interest, then I'll ask exactly what it is that they want to accomplish. I offer services in a big range of different avenues. Like I can do designer reviews or help you build an organization. Or one of the things I love to do the most is actually factory support. I went to the factory in China for Apple 13 separate times. I spent 6 months of my life there. And I love doing that type of work. And I love working with the people who are in the factory. it's like really honest work, and there's always a very clear goal. So I try to figure out, what type of work's to be done, how that aligns with the other stuff that I'm doing. Currently, I'm doing some company advising stuff, and I'm also doing a design on my own. So I probably wouldn't go and take another design at the same time. I want to try and fill out the space of the things that I'm doing so I can retain. At Apple, you do all of those things at the same time every day. And so I want to retain those skills, and I want to be able to, line up some companies where I can do each of those skills for those different companies at the same time. Does that kind of answer that question?
Yeah, thank you.
So there's another question from Barney here, with the caveat that he's beginner. I'm not sure if beginner in terms of contracting or in terms of being an EE.
I also feel like a noob, so don't worry about it. I think everyone does, no matter how experienced they are.
You need to start from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
There's always something you don't know. But yeah, so basically, so his question is, how important is it to know about FPGAs in EE freelancing?
You definitely don't have to. Freelancing is cool because you can sort of decide what you want to do and market yourself the way that you want to. So I actually don't have any FPGA skills, and I just don't market that I have those. And then I find things that are in different realms. It is useful to have a little bit of FPGA like knowledge. You want to know enough to be dangerous, as they say. I've done a lot of boards for people that include FPGAs, but that doesn't mean that I know how to program them. So you want to understand like things like what type of oscillators does the FPGA need, and like how clean do those need to be. If you're using the PLL or the transceiver bank, then you have a lot of different requirements. So sort of like understanding at a high level what FPGAs require, similar to what you do for another chip like a microcontroller. That way you can do a design with one if you want to, and then you can learn over time. One of the key points that I've been thinking about recently is like breaking into new spaces. And how do you do that? And so one of the ways is like, if you wanted to get into learning how to do FPGA stuff, you could find someone who wants a board done that has an FPGA on it, offer them some kind of an incentive if you're not, if you don't think that you'll end up being a top bid or in the running for it. Tell them that you're trying to break into that space and you have some experience, but you can use that to learn along the way. And as soon as you've done that project, then you can kind of go into, you can leverage that to go into another similar project that is a little more in detail. And then that way you can just use those as stepping stones to learn FPGA. What else you guys got?
So there's two questions here that are rather similar. So I'm going to read one, then add the second one kind of aside. So it's just, how should someone decide if they should go more full-time versus freelance? And sort of the related question is, why do you decide to switch from working for a company to doing consulting or freelance or contracting work?
That's a great question. I think it's really scary for a lot of people because you have to quit your job and you have to sort of like take a leap of faith. And one of the things that I was really uncomfortable with, and honestly, sometimes I'm still pretty uncomfortable with, is pitching customers. I don't love doing that and being like, hey, look at me, I can help you with something. Like, that's not something that lots of people enjoy doing. Some people do for sure. So yeah, there's a big barrier to jump into that. For me, I wanted to do it because one of the reasons that I said earlier was at Apple, I was in charge of like 5 or 6 different things at a super high level, and I would do them all every day and talk to like hundreds of people each day. And there aren't a lot of companies where you can do all of those things and still have some semblance of a work-life balance. And so what I like to do is line up a couple of different customers and be able to work on those things, but at different times and with different people. And that allows you to still have some kind of a balance in your life and some kind of freedom, but still satisfy all of those places that you want to work in. So that was one of the reasons. The other is like life freedom. It offers you a lot of that. You're your own boss. I'm one of those people who has a really hard time if a boss tells me that I need to do something and there's not a great reason and I don't agree with it and we can't. Like I'm always okay if we hash it out and then I'm on the same page as them and I agree that that's the right solution. But if we talk about it and there's a bunch of arguments for why the other way is better, I'm not someone who can just like do it just because that's the way someone wants it to be done. You do run into that a little bit with contracting as well. Sometimes you just got to do that, but you have a lot more control. Like you're not stuck in that organization if you want to do that. You can always like shift your focus to other customers and sort of keep yourself engaged that way. We're doing like the real honest version of contracting here instead of the, it's great, you just work whenever you want, blah, blah, blah.
And so related to that, this is my own question. How did you realize when it was time, or what were the cues that made you realize, okay, it's time, or I'm ready? Or and you're never fully ready, I guess, but what were the cues that said, okay, like this is as ready as I'm ever going to be?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So when I was in the process of leaving Apple, I had planned to become a consultant at that time, and that was sort of what I was thinking about doing. And then after I had left, I was talking to a couple different companies, and one of them wanted me to do all of the things that I had specified, like all of the 5 things that I had been doing at Apple. And so feeling like I wasn't quite ready, I joined that company, and that was the company that makes intelligence equipment. It was also kind of a really satisfying field to be in. There's a lot of motivation there to go to work, which I mean, after your 5th iPhone, you kind of lack that a little bit. You're not like, I just want to go make more iPhones, even though I've already made a bunch. So yeah, that's why I think it's such a good question, is because I wasn't sure, and I wasn't even sure when I decided to leave that company that it was the right move. I don't know if you're ever sure, but you can start kind of doing it a little bit on the side. I mean, when things shifted to remote, it was also a good time for me to try and line some things up on the side in case I decided to leave that job. And so once I did, I was able to have a couple things going. It's really hard if you leave your company that you're working at and you leave your income behind, and then you start trying to find customers. That's a really difficult process, and there's a lot of change and a lot of stress all at once. So I think when you're ready is when you have a desire to do it and you have some capability to line up some customers. If you can't get customers, then clearly you're not ready, but you also kind of have to take a jump at some point. So do what you can to try and solicit some customers. And then, if you've got one, then you're ready, because you clearly can convince people that you're worth it.
Cool. There's one more here. So how do you approach creating a proposal for a project? How to choose an hourly rate, retainer contract, or project-based pricing? So basically around how do you approach project and how do you decide pricing and the way of pricing?
Yeah, that's another great question. Honestly, for me, it's how much do I want to do that work, and how badly does the customer need it? If I'm super excited about the work and I really want to do that project, then I lower my rate and I just work with them and I do what I need to do in order to be pretty sure that I'm going to be able to get that contract. Yeah, so if it's something you're really excited about, how do you set the rate in the first place? I talked to a bunch of different people who hire consultants and then figured out what they were paying those consultants. And honestly, I just lowered it a bit from there because I knew that I was starting out. And then you can kind of raise it as you go with other customers. But that's one of the cool things that I like about consulting is you get a chance to start a new relationship each time you work with a different company. And it's fun to maintain those relationships over time. But there's a lot of freedom in being able to like redefine yourself each time in your company and what you want to do about it. One of the things that I'm trying to do now is build out the Apple Consulting company a bit more. And so not only do I have to figure out what rate am I, but I also have to figure out what rate are these other people, and how do we solicit work as a team. And so yeah, it's hard to define is the answer, but you can do a bunch of market research. You can talk to folks. You can people are really open to chatting about this stuff. So I mean, you can ask other consultants. You can ask me if you want to. I'm available.
Okay, so there's another one here, which we kind of talked, that you kind of like touched on, but maybe you can give it a little more detail. So it says, do you think it's beneficial to specialize in a specific EE field for contracting, or be a well-rounded / generalist electrical engineer?
Yeah, I think I have some opinions about this. I think specificity is really helpful. And okay, so I think okay, so you want to be really good at what you do. It is much easier to do that when you're doing very specific work and you're focusing on a particular area. Obviously, the best answer is to be a generalist who is as good at all of the individual things as a specialist is in each of those disciplines, but that's really, really hard to do. And, you know, you're not going to do that when you start off. That's like a 20, 30-year process if you can ever get there. And so what I would say is you start as a specialist, you build out your capability in that, build out your scope of work, build out the number of customers that you're helping, and then you can branch off into other disciplines and sort of build out that level of capability as you go into the other disciplines. But the best answer, because every customer, all they want is just be like, hey, I have this idea. And then 4 weeks later, you come back to them with an entire product that meets all of their needs. That's like the ideal state. So in that sense, generalism is great. But what I think is the most effective way to accomplish that is when you have a team of specialists with you. Literally when I was like 12 or 13 or something, I was building computers and I was like, one day I'm going to be the person who can do all of these things and design the motherboard and write the software and do all this stuff. I started down that path and then I realized I can't do that. I can't be that good at each of those individual things. I do know some people who are quite good at all of those things. But it takes so long and so much effort to become like a subject matter expert in any one of those things that I would do that first and then move into the other areas if you want to. I mean, you could be a specialist in EE and then build up like a hobbyist level of firmware, or even like college level firmware or college level high level software. It's great to be able to understand those things and be able to talk across disciplines. But yeah, I would say focus in one area and then you can build out your other skills over time. It's also a good way to build up your rate. Like if you're a specialist and you're highly sought after for that field, that's how you get a much higher hourly rate. If you're a generalist, then you're fighting with a ton of other people for the same contract. And then it's just a race to whatever the lowest hourly rate is. And I want to go back real quick to how to choose an hourly rate, retainer, contractor, project-based pricing, because I think I skipped that part of the question. For me, it's just deciding what financial situation do you want? Like how are your finances and how do you want to sustain yourself? I think that retainer is a really nice approach if you want to build a relationship with a company over time, because you're essentially just a part-time employee at that point. And that's a great way to like build influence over time. But hourly is great too. I've done that for a couple of different places, and that also gives you a lot of freedom. It's just, you know, what it is that you want for your financial life.
So then touching on the specialist / generalist question, I think it might be helpful to add some definition of what do you mean by generalist or specialist, in the sense that, so yeah, like EE could be a specialization, but then like within EE, within electronic engineering, you have a bunch of different areas, right? And most likely you're not going to be an expert in all of them, right? So you can have whatever RF type of process. You can have IoT/connectivity and Wi-Fi. You can have super complex like high-speed boards like motherboards or DDR memories. You can have like FPGA routing, or you can have analog. Like it's just so much.
Totally.
So how, like, do you think it makes sense to specialize even in one of these areas,
Totally.
or like have a broader?
Yeah, I think that's a great clarification. That's sort of more what I meant, because it's really hard to, like you said, be an expert in even all of these EE subjects. The first, yeah, I think it's really important to, for me, I mean, I just started building products, and then the products got more and more complicated. And so I would say the first specialization that I got was really high density, super, like tons of high speed, lots of different types of high speed, interconnected flex circuits and stuff like that. And so that was the thing that I was best at first. And then I built out from that. It was easy at Apple because literally it's just a fire hose. They just give you stuff that needs to be done. Like I was thinking about this last night. They would give you something on Monday. There's no expectation that like, oh, we'll teach you how to do this. They just like drop you on a project, and then they're like, they expect you to know how to do it. So I would get a new project on Monday. By Wednesday, I had to be an expert in it. And then by Friday, I'd have to be done. And so that was sort of how I learned to learn very quickly and develop specialization in a bunch of different areas, and then put that all together into like a product development package. So yeah, it was like designing boards was the first one, but then factory was the second one. And how do you set up a factory, and how do you like make it really efficient? It's really different to ramp to 100 units versus 1,000, and then 1,000 to 1,000,000 is like a whole different ball game. And so, yeah, I mean, I think specialize in all the different stages. You can pick a specialization in any of the different EE areas. Like some people are really great at analog, some people are really great at high speed. Some people are really great at like just hammering out a product board. And that's a whole skill in and of itself. So yeah, I would say within EE, pick something, go after it. And then within EE, even you can pick a different focus in one of these areas, and just, you know, pick one that you're most excited about, and then pick another one and just keep going. And, you know, as long as there's energy, just go after it.
It's a good point about sort of also be, so regardless of which area you specialize in, analog, high speed, RF, whatever, that you have at least some experience on how those things are going to get manufactured, right? Because eventually, like, the idea of any board is for it to be manufactured. So.
That's right. That's right. That's sort of the key. That's I think not a lot of EEs focus in that, and that's one of the ones that I'm most passionate about, because you can have the best design in the world, but if you can't build it, then it's not worth anything. And so first you want to have a good design, obviously, and there's challenges in manufacturing that, but knowing how to manufacture something makes you better at making designs. And then also it means that you can go in and solve a bunch of manufacturing problems, which is where most of the delays in your design will probably happen. You can have a really big impact. And I think it's sort of missed by a lot of people.
No PCB design survives first contact with the factory, they say.
That's right. Yeah.
So there's a bunch of other questions here. So one is, any fun war stories from working at Apple that you can share? It seems like a great environment to cut your teeth.
It was a great environment to learn in. It was like, yeah, if you imagine putting your mouth over a fire hose and then turning it on, that's exactly what it felt like. Like you just get floored and you just try and hold on. And by trying to hold on, I was there for 5 years. You try and hold on, and you learn so much in the process. So yeah, there's a ton of war stories. I'm sure some I can't talk about. Let me see if I can think of one that's a little more public. I'll tell one fun one. So I was working on the iPhone 10. This was the project that I worked the most on. And I guess it's not so much of a war story, but it's a fun story. I had gone to the factory once already for iPhone 10. I did the development platforms for many iPhones. I did them for iPhone SE, the first one I did iPhone 10, and then I did with a team of people, iPhone 12, whatever the other SKUs were of that. And so I had gone to the factory once for that. We didn't know what the phone was going to look like. We just were building all the electronics for it, and so we sort of knew the features, but the ID, like what it's going to look like, is always a secret. And so I was one of the first few system EEs. That was the team I was on at the factory for Proto One. If you don't know, most major electronics manufacturers, they do a bunch of different builds. You can't just ramp something from prototype to a million. You got to do, we did like Proto 1, Proto 2, EVT, which is like evaluation test, and then DVT, design evaluation test. And so Proto 1, it was the first time that you actually build form factors, which is the actual unit. And I was in the EE lab because we built them all for the first time, and none of them worked. So we had to go and figure out why. And it was like one of the first 3 units that was ever built, and it came into the lab, and I was sitting there watching as it came in. And I was like, oh, that's what it looks like. Holy shit. Because this was the generation where, you know, there was no home button, there was no nothing. It had Face ID for the first time. It was a totally different, it was like all screen. That was a really amazing moment to know that like one of the only form factors that exists, one of 3, was in the room with me. And I was like, how many people in the world know this at this moment? It's like, you know, 30 people. And so that was a really cool moment, just experiencing like the gravity of the situation. And yeah, kind of getting to see something before the rest of the world knows that it even exists. And this was like, you know, a year or more before it was announced. So that was super cool.
Cool, nice. There's, I think, last one, if I'm not mistaken. So it says, what makes a great client versus not a great client? Are there any red flags with clients we should know about or look out for?
Yeah, I think for me, it's like changing the expectations a bunch. This is something you also don't want to do as a contractor or freelancer, is you're always managing expectations. So when you set an expectation with somebody, you better hold up to that expectation. Otherwise, you explain exactly why it is ahead of time that you aren't, and give them a chance to say, no, I want something else. So I put a ton of effort into making sure that I do that for everyone that I work with. Honestly, it's a great like personal life rule as well. But when a company does that with me and they're like, hey, I want you to build this, and then I go and start building it, and then they're like, oh no, that's not, like, let me be clear, it's not that I'm not making what they had originally asked for. It's that they have changed their expectations without communicating it to me. If I was just making something wrong, then of course we go and fix it. But if they change their expectations with time over what we're building together, then I've wasted a bunch of time, and I know that it's going to be bad communication in the future. One of the things I have to say in this space is the level of and quality of communication doesn't generally improve over time. And so if you have concerns, those are probably valid, and those are probably not going to change. And so you can try and resolve those ones, and you should, and try and see if there's something that you can do to sort of like make the situation better and be really clear about what it is that you need. But if you keep not getting that from them, you know, you probably have to try and move on and find somebody else to work with. That's the one that really makes me annoyed, because I've sunk a bunch of time into something and it's wasted time, and I don't like wasting my time.
So pulling from that thread, what would you say is a good way of sort of managing expectations? How do you use, like, like a written format? Do you create like spec sheets, or like what's your like preferred way of saying, okay, like this is what we're building, this is what we're planning for, this is how our relationship is going to look like? How do you do that? How do you present it?
Yeah, I like to make it as clear as possible. This is one of the things that you practice really hard at Apple is you want to display visually in the most clear way possible without I mean, you can use words obviously, but try and use as few words as possible what it is exactly that you're trying to accomplish. It's sort of like the same as really good presentation slide design. It's like, how do you communicate this in the fewest possible pixels? So I try and put together, like if it's a product, then I'll do like an entire product breakdown, sort of like a reverse iFixit, and then show these are all the different parts. This is what each board has the features of. These are all the connections. And so, yeah, you have to always have, if it's an important customer, always have a block diagram set of each board design that you're doing with them and review the shit out of that with them so that everyone is on the same page about exactly what you're accomplishing. You can even have them sign off on that. I don't ever do that. I just have them like verbally confirm that this is what we agree on and this is how we're going forward. Things can change after that. Like currently there's the semiconductor shortage. If you can't buy a part, then obviously you have to change your expectation. But this is one of those times where you just, you look at it, you plan it ahead of time. You're like, these parts are hard to get and you buy them. If you can't, then as soon as you know, you communicate it and you're like, hey, we got to change this one thing. But that's why I think it's so important to set the initial expectation. You both understand exactly what the plan is. And then as soon as you know that that expectation is going to differ, you just let them know immediately. And then you have to make sure at the same time, give them your plan to fix it. Because if you're just telling them problem after problem after problem, there's no point in them working with you. Like they can find problems on their own, but they can't fix them. So yeah, expectation is like the bedrock of that whole relationship.
Cool. So there's a question that has been answered in the chat, I think. So is there anything else, Lance, you want to add about that question? If not, the other one is any tips as a freelancer integrating with internal teams? Do you adopt their processes or you use your own? And do you have to do anything to earn their trust?
Yeah, it's a good question. I tend to adopt internal processes. So there's another thing that they say when you join Apple, which was like, you may have opinions about what it is that we do, but we have good reasons for doing the things that we do. Try it for 6 months and see if, if there's issues there that you still feel strongly about, then at that point, let's talk. But, you don't want to come in and try and change things right off the bat because it's totally possible that you're wrong, right? I mean, I've tried to do that a couple of times and there's a reason why people in different industries do things different ways. And one of the things that's hard about working across industries is you can't always, like aerospace and defense, they're really far back in terms of technology, but sometimes that's for a reason. Yes, for sure. There's times where they need to come up to the ages a little bit and you want to improve their designs, but you can't apply every lesson from the tech sector to aerospace or defense. You really got to figure out what it is that they need and why they're doing the things that they're doing. Once you know that, then you can go and try and improve other things over time. But you're not respecting the client if you just go in and try and do everything your way. I mean, if you're working with like a 1-person startup, maybe they're asking you like, hey, can you bring in some new processes and like, how would you establish this? But if it's an already established company and they have ways of doing things, then you try that first. And then if there's still problems or if it's not as efficient as the way you do things after a little bit of time, then you let them know and you work with them, and that way you can elevate your customer as well as just doing a design. And I think that's how you be really effective as a contractor, is you help the company grow as well as just making products with them. And then I think the second part was, do you have to do anything to earn their trust? I think that's it. I think it's just respect them. And also the expectations thing I was talking about. Once you have expectations, if that deviates and you don't tell them, that's how you lose their trust immediately. And so you gotta just do that over time, and over time they'll see that what it is that you're saying to them is always how it turns out. And so that you build over time, and it takes a bunch of time to get their trust, but you can lose it very quickly. Oh yeah, aerospace. Oh my God, yeah, that's tough. It's a really tough one. I'm coming at that from trying to improve some equipment that's used in aerospace, and it's really hard to do that in a way that brings it forward while still keeping a lot of the reliability. I mean, a lot of places are using chips that are like 30 years old. We're worried about the semiconductor shortage and our lead time is a year. Some of those lead times are like 5 years to get some parts. It's crazy. So yeah, trying to bring other industries forward is really worthwhile, but it's so difficult and it takes a ton of effort. And sometimes, or always, it's not as fast as we want. I see one from Lance. It's what's different about working with startups versus larger orgs or government jobs. It's really speed and like freedom. So startups, a lot of the time you get to essentially operate on your own, and maybe they'll have ideas of what it is that they want, but you really have a lot more freedom in how you turn that into a product, especially in the tech sector. There's a lot of freedom in that, and you can kind of build things really quickly. The corollary to that is that there's a huge speed expectation of you as well. And so if you're working in aerospace or defense, like if it goes slowly, that's sort of the expectation. But in tech, you have to be really quick, and you have to make sure that your timeline, it's not just your rate, it's also the timeline that you propose that will get you a job, and sticking to it sometimes is really difficult. I find that you have to do so much more upfront planning in order to hit those milestones when you're working in tech and you're working quickly in like a startup environment. An organization like Apple, if we're talking about like startup versus Apple, the speed is the same, but the scope is very different. So, and also the attention, I would say the attention is one of the things that surprises me the most. Like, you're working for a startup and nobody knows about it yet. No one's asking you about it all the time. But when I was working on iPhone, literally I'd go see my family and they're like, when's the next iPhone coming out? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, it's just, it's a good time to buy an iPhone always, is the line that they tell you to say. But yeah, the attention is a lot higher. Government is a whole different ballgame. I mean, we're talking about aerospace being slow. Government is like, I don't know. It takes a minute.
So there's another one from Adam. So how much of your business consulting would you say was brought in through direct outreach networking, like versus marketing, word of mouth, reviews?
Honestly, it's like 99% direct outreach and networking. We are only a year old, and so I think that will change with time, where when companies like when we have a more established presence, and there's more word of mouth, more people talking about what we do as a company and how good we are, I think that'll change with time. But for right now, at least for the first year, probably even longer than that, it's just direct outreach. It's so much easier to do this through your network, because if you know someone at a company, they're going to be a lot more likely to respond to you. I'm very lucky in that a bunch of Apple people who I worked with have left and gone off to a bunch of different companies. And I can say, hey, I'm in this space. Do you need help with your factory? Do you need help with your design? Do you want me to review stuff for you? I know that a lot of people don't have that option. So, building out your portfolio and trying to figure out exactly what design space you want to get into, that can really help. And then you can focus on a couple of different companies and hit them up, a bunch of different times. If they don't answer you the first time, that's par for the course. I get shut out a lot, actually, a surprising amount. You would think that I'm an ex-iPhone engineer is like a magic sentence that opens all the doors, but it totally doesn't. I get ghosted like most of the time. So you really gotta talk to them over time, build a relationship, maybe do some work for them for free first and show that you're for real. And then then you can kind of build that relationship over time. But it's hard. It's actually pretty hard.
So someone's asking you for your website, so you don't have to plug it yourself. You have the question.
Thank you for that question. I appreciate that question. We don't have a website yet, but I will let you know when a website becomes available. We're sort of flying, even on LinkedIn. I don't even put the name on LinkedIn. It's a little bit stealth right now, but we're getting there. We're building with time. I'll keep you posted.
If people want to get in contact, maybe they can chat with you on Slack or something like that. Or
yeah, if anyone wants to, if they've got more questions for me, join the Flux Slack. I'm in there pretty often, so you can hit me up there. I think my username is just my name, so you can find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can hit me up with messages there, but I think that Slack is a good way to get real-time communication back and forth. And I think Lance just posted a link in the chat.
Yep.
I think we went through most of the questions. Like I was also curious to see if like anybody here in the call is a contractor or thinking about it. Like what? Like I would love to see that. Like why decided to join this call? So I know we have a few students. So Bani just read your intro in Slack. So anything you want to share? You're trying to become a contractor or not?
Yeah, and I think also if you have interest in like learning more about this space over time, it sounds like we're going to be doing a contractor bootcamp, and I'll be a part of that as well. So we want to help educate people and give them the tools that they need in order to be successful in that space. So starting here with soft skills, but we're going to talk about like, what is high speed and how do I do it? And like, how do I pick the right oscillator? What's how do I deal with FPGAs? We're going to talk about all that stuff. So it'll be pretty cool.
Cool. So yeah, I'm saying that. So he's basically doing pro bono contracting for a startup, in Nigeria. So yeah, maybe so in the next crash courses about sort of or contractor bootcamp, we're gonna cover not only like monetization and pricing and soft skills, but also like more like hard skills, right? Like how would you design? Like how do you manufacture something for the customer? Like where would you manufacture that? Like things like that. I mean, all of this is also open. So if anybody has any ideas or things that they would like us to talk about, our Slack is a good place to give us feedback, and we'll make sure to include those in your next sessions.
Yeah, a quick plug for also if you're doing pro bono contracting, that's really awesome. One of the things that's cool about doing contracting for money is that you have free time in order to do that. So I found when I had a full-time job, I didn't have time to do any of that stuff. My friends would be like, hey, I want help on this project. I'd be like, I'm just too tired. I can't do it. When you're contracting for, like part-time, like 10 or 20 hours a week, and your financial needs are met, then you can break out into these other things, and you can, if your friends have projects, you can help them with those. If you want to go find a not-for-profit, you have the ability to do that. Whereas when you have a really fixed schedule, it's really hard to break out into those other things. And so I found that a lot more satisfying than when I was working for a company full time, because I could have an impact in things that I really cared about. Not that I didn't care about my job, but I had the freedom to break out into things. It was like, hey, this not for profit needs like a solar board. Awesome. I can just go do that. Whereas I wouldn't have the time to do it before.